I walked outside to find my car covered in sticky egg yolk, courtesy of my neighbor, who stood proudly by his over-the-top Halloween decorations. "Your car blocks my display," he sneered, as if that justified the mess he'd made. I wiped my hands on my jeans, seething with frustration, but I already knew exactly how I'd get back at him. By the time Halloween night arrived, my revenge had everyone on the street talking, and my neighbor regretting everything. As I stood there, staring at my car dripping with egg yolk, I could feel my blood boiling. Each drop of that sticky mess seemed to mock my attempt at keeping peace on the street. Greg's actions weren't just about Halloween, he'd crossed a line. Knowing he was sitting back with a grin as I cleaned up only fueled my determination to settle the score. My neighbor, Greg, leaned against his porch railing, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Nice makeover," he called out, chuckling at his handiwork. His audacity was infuriating, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. Instead, I forced a tight smile and waved, determined to show him that this wasn't over yet. His little prank had only strengthened my resolve. His yard was cluttered with giant inflatable pumpkins, skeletons, and flashing lights, a Halloween eyesore that was impossible to miss. Every inch seemed to proclaim Greg's obsession with being the center of attention. Neighbors had to swerve to avoid his gaudy displays, but Greg saw them as a masterpiece. The inflatables, though larger than life, weren't enough for him. He wanted everyone to stop and admire. He had been on my case for weeks, complaining that my car blocked the view of his display from the street, but I never thought he'd actually retaliate like this. "Move it or lose it," he'd muttered more than once, but I considered him all talk. Now, with egg yolk running down my car's hood, his actions spoke louder than words. It was clear I had to respond. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my cool as I wiped off the worst of the mess with an old towel, and an idea began to form. Revenge should be just as public, I thought, glancing toward his obnoxious decorations. I'd need some supplies and a little bit of planning, but something told me I could steal a bit of his spotlight come Halloween night. Over the next few days, I kept my distance from Greg, but I could feel his eyes on me every time I parked my car. He watched like a hawk, suspicious yet oddly pleased, as if my silent treatment was a victory. Noticing him peeking from behind his curtains, I played it as cool as possible, ensuring he didn't suspect the brewing plan I had in mind. He made a big show of adding more decorations to his yard, practically daring me to block his display again. Each new addition seemed chosen to provoke. A towering ghost here, a shrieking banshee there. Greg was clearly enjoying his one-sided competition, testing my patience and resolve. With each stake driven into the ground, my anticipation of Halloween night grew, knowing I had a trick of my own. My irritation grew with every inflatable ghost he stuck in the ground. Greg's relentless pursuit of Halloween glory showed no signs of stopping. A wave of classic rock blared from his porch speakers, his voice boomed over it, guiding curious neighbors through his exhibit of fake gravestones and cobwebs. Each evening added another layer to his spectacle, but also reinforced my resolve to upstage him. I caught glimpses of him chatting with neighbors, pointing at my car and shaking his head as if I was the bad guy. From across the street, I saw nodding heads and shared smirks, his whispering campaign doing its damage. But let him talk. I had no intention of keeping their sympathy. Soon enough, the neighborhood would see the other side of this Halloween feud. It wasn't just about the eggs anymore. It was Greg's smug attitude that really got under my skin. He strutted around as if he owned the entire block, each sneer aimed in my direction, a reminder of his audacity. Those eggs had morphed from an annoyance into a symbol of his overblown ego and entitlement. I found my irritation growing every time he passed by, basking in his Halloween superiority. That's when I decided his precious Halloween night would be the perfect time for payback. I couldn't just let Greg's stunt slide. He needed a lesson in humility. If he was going to make this about whose decorations got the most attention, I would make sure mine stole the spotlight. As the idea cemented in my mind, I felt a sense of anticipation growing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I didn't want to rush into revenge without a plan, so I started by observing him. Sitting quietly on my porch, I watched Greg as he busied himself in his yard. From the "Don't waste your energy on revenge" playlists blaring through his speakers to the extravagant additions he paraded eagerly, every move provided clues. If I watched him long enough, surely a perfect opportunity would present itself. It was just a matter of time. Every night, Greg would adjust his decorations, making sure everything was in perfect alignment for the trick-or-treaters. It was like a ritual, his obsessive adjustments ensuring the right angles and lights. He talked to his props as though coaxing life into them, his focus unbroken, impervious to any disruptions. All of it added to the spectacle, yet it was this dedication that revealed the simplest of vulnerabilities. That one misplaced item could unravel his entire show. I noticed he had a spotlight focused on a giant, motion-activated animatronic witch. It was the crown jewel of his display, the one piece he seemed most proud of. The witch's eyes opened and closed eerily, and her mechanical cackle echoed across the street. I realized that without the spotlight, her impact would be completely lost. This was a potential weak point, and I couldn't help but smile as I noted it down mentally. That gave me an idea, and I spent the next few days gathering supplies and testing my little surprise. I wasn't jumping into this haphazardly. Each piece of my counter display needed to be perfect. I quietly gathered wires, batteries, even a few old Halloween props of my own. I improvised with some tech, testing and retesting to ensure everything would go smoothly. By the end of it, I felt like a mad scientist. By Halloween night, I was ready and parked my car in its usual spot, right in front of his house. I knew the sight of my car in his display's highlight would irritate Greg to no end, and that knowledge alone brought a grin to my face. Having everything set, I waited patiently. The neighborhood had already come alive with costumed children and their chattering parents. My setup was flawless. Now it was time to wait. I waited for him to come outside and confront me, but he didn't. Instead, he stayed inside, probably lurking behind his curtains, waiting for the first sign of trouble. Strange as it was, I couldn't help feeling slightly disappointed. Greg was being unusually quiet, and I knew it meant he was up to something. But either way, my plan was in place, and the anticipation kept the adrenaline rushing through my veins. As trick-or-treaters began to flood the neighborhood, I watched Greg from a distance. The street was a bustling river of costumes and shrieks, parents hustling along behind their kids. Among them, Greg navigated setting his final touches. It was almost amusing how hard he worked to maintain his image, never realizing the trouble I had silently set for him. My heart thumped with excitement as the perfect time to act drew ever closer. Expecting him to blow up when he saw my car, I was surprised at his unusually calm demeanor. Greg moved through the crowd with an air of unaffected ease. His grin felt more forced than genuine, but nevertheless, he showed no signs of bursting out. It was unnerving in a way, yet it brought a competitive thrill. Was he truly unbothered, or simply waiting for his moment? Either way, I hoped he enjoyed false security. I overheard Greg bragging about his new remote-controlled fog machine. He was practically gleaming as he shared the details with a group of parents, claiming it was the best in the neighborhood. The crowd seemed to hang on his every word. His confidence was a bit off-putting, further convincing me that he had some tricks up his sleeve. His pride in his gadgets showed just how much he valued his Halloween empire. For a moment, I doubted my plan. Maybe he didn't care as much as I thought he would. After all, Greg was basking in the attention, and possibly my car was the least of his worries. The way Greg carried himself, so confident and at ease, made me second-guess my assumptions. Had I misjudged his priorities? Thoughts of backing down floated through my mind, but Greg's previous antics kept me anchored to my mission. But then, I saw him glaring at my car out of the corner of his eye. It was a fleeting glance, one masked behind forced cheer as he welcomed another family to his haunted wonderland. No matter how patient or collected he seemed, his eyes betrayed a simmering annoyance directed towards my vehicle. It reignited my certainty that my suspicions were correct. His composure might be a facade, concealing his true feelings about my presence. I knew he was just waiting for the right moment to strike. You could almost see him planning, methodically lining up the steps he would take. Maybe he had some grand reveal in mind, something extravagant to draw every gaze his way. His patience suggested a seasoned strategist, thinking several moves ahead. Knowing Greg, he wouldn't waste a second of his spectacle on anything less than a dramatic entrance. I had to stay on alert. Greg's restraint made me uneasy as more families arrived to see his display. The driveway and sidewalks brimmed with awed children and intrigued parents. My adversary mingled without causing a scene, but that same controlled demeanor set me on edge. Surely he wasn't planning to simply ride the evening out without a hitch. I began to wonder if he'd toyed with my expectations for his own amusement, but by now, backing down wasn't an option. I felt the tension building as I watched his eyes flick between his decorations and my car. Each cautious glance suggested a readiness to act with the precision of a grand master. Parents bustled about, capturing memories amid laughter and chaos. Yet, Greg's persistent awareness of my presence suggested something unsaid lingered between us. A mutual understanding that this calm was temporary and fragile. The atmosphere hummed with expectations, all hanging on an inevitable confrontation. He was waiting for the right moment to embarrass me in front of the crowd. His carefully curated public persona wouldn't allow for anything less. Watching, I knew he hoped to see me squirm, to fluster or falter under neighborhood scrutiny. His whole demeanor was that of a maestro planning his symphony's crescendo. But no matter how calculated his display, I was ready, my own setup prepared to spoil his carefully orchestrated spotlight at any moment. I double-checked my setup, making sure everything was in place. Cables hidden, devices configured, all was positioned just as I envisioned. My clandestine creation lay dormant, waiting for its cue. Each component refocused my resolve to follow through, regardless of Greg's maneuvering. At this stage, everything needed to work perfectly. The contingency plans were set, my pulse mixed with adrenaline and excitement. Once initiated, there'd be no going back. Greg's spectacle would soon be tested. By now, the street was buzzing with excitement. Kids dashed from house to house, Halloween bags sorting sweet bounty. Adults lingered in clusters, drawn together by the atmosphere of shared festivity. Conversations mingled with music and animated props. Greg moved through it all like a reigning monarch, confident and jovial. Amid this feverish scene, my own preparations stirred quietly in the background. Soon, my contribution to the evening's thrill was set to unfold, matching the night's energy. Everything was perfect, for me. The energy from the street party matched the anticipation I felt inside. Parents, kids, neighbors, all were unaware of the intricate game unfolding between Greg and me. His extravagant charisma overshadowed the small, idle threat I presented, pushing everything to the tipping point. For me, it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about seizing this opportune moment to put both our displays to the ultimate test. The night was prime for surprises. Just as I was about to set my plan into motion, something unexpected happened. A raucous cheer erupted from down the street, distracting Greg for just a moment. I turned to see a group of kids sprinting towards his yard. Their laughter filled the air, carefree and oblivious to the tension between Greg and me. This sudden influx shifted the mood, adding a layer of unpredictability. It was as if fate had introduced a new player to the night's unfolding drama. One of the neighborhood kids tripped over Greg's power cord, yanking it from the outlet. The abruptness of the moment jarred everyone. His lights flickered and died, pulling focus to a single comical second where the entire yard blinked into darkness. Silence stretched, punctuated only by gasps and giggles from the children. Greg's face fell, understanding dawning as he scrambled futilely to spot the issue amid the gathering shadows. It seemed the night had taken an unexpected turn. All of the decorations went dark, and the witch collapsed in a heap. Her sinister cackle cut short, replaced by confusion as the crowd whispered and pointed. Greg's masterpiece lay in utter disarray, the feared witch now a mess of fabric and wires against the dim backdrop. My eyes adjusted to the newly subdued landscape, sensing this unraveling had temporarily shifted the spotlight away from his grand design. For a fleeting second, harmony settled across his disrupted domain. Greg rushed over, cursing under his breath as he scrambled to fix it. His frantic movements were almost comical as he dashed from one prop to another, desperate to restore the carefully curated scene. The darkness mirrored his growing discomfort. Each subtle grimace showed his mounting frustration. I watched him fumble with the tangled cords, feeling no urge to step in or assist. His mishap seemed oddly providential, sealing a moment that felt long overdue and gratifying. I smirked, thinking that maybe karma had already handled my revenge for me. Greg's desperation was palpable as he tried to re-establish control over his inanimate army. Parents murmured nearby, casting curious glances. It was an ironic twist watching him face the chaos. My plan simmered still, untouched by this unexpected tumble into disorder. However satisfying this moment felt, I wasn't prepared to let fate take all the credit. Finishing what I'd started was my unspoken resolution. But as soon as the power came back on, Greg's display was even brighter and louder than before. The witch sprang back to life with a vengeance, her eyes flashing as if declaring dominion. This newfound intensity drew fresh admiration from the onlookers. Secretly, I admired his resolve, though the heightened spectacle also signaled the rekindling of my own intentions. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and his grandeur only fueled my determination. It was getting late, and the crowd had thinned out. Most families had seen the sights and collected their candy quotas, filtering off towards quieter homes. Each passing group left behind a thickening blanket of silence, companioned by footsteps in retreat. The street, once buzzing, now hummed with subdued energy. With only a sparse few people lingering, the opportunity to execute my plan became brighter. The night still held the chance for one last showcase. Greg, thinking the worst was over, started mingling with the last few families. His demeanor was decidedly relaxed now, an air of victory surrounding him despite earlier mishaps. He chatted freely, flaunting decorations as a master of ceremonies might present a lauded finale. In his mind, the spectacle had triumphed. Each passing conversation seemed to add another layer to his self-assuredness. His lowered guard became a signal, inviting the precise moment my patience had awaited. That's when I made my move. The timing felt impeccable, quiet enough to catch everyone off guard, yet perfect for an unexpected flourish. I'd held back long enough, watching and planning meticulously. My resolve simmered as I prepared to bring my own spectacle to fruition. Greg, absorbed in his world, gave little heed. This was it, the crescendo of the evening edging insistently into place. My heart raced, knowing that the night's dynamics were on the verge of shifting. I triggered my surprise using a remote control I'd rigged earlier. The unassuming device buzzed to life in my pocket, igniting a chain reaction I'd carefully structured. Across the yard, my drone painted like a bat took flight, slicing silently through the night air. It was discreet, yet deliberate, a calculated incursion into Greg's carefully planned soiree. The evening was poised for upheaval as my creation made its grand entrance, designed to reclaim the spotlight. A small drone I had painted to look like a giant bat swooped down, buzzing right past Greg's head. Its wings flapped mechanically in the air, its presence both unexpected and spectacular. Gasps erupted from the sparse crowd as they noticed the strange creature appear, and Greg's eyes bulged in surprise. The scene was set exactly for the reaction I'd hoped for, a disruption in his controlled narrative, now unsettled by my mechanical invader. Greg yelped in shock, stumbling back as the drone circled his yard. He waved his hands, trying to fend off the intruding bat as it swooped closer, more for effect than any impending danger. The surrounding atmosphere grew lively with laughter and surprise, neighbors now split between alarm and amusement. Greg's typical composure faltered a touch, his bold facade hinting at a vulnerability hidden behind his eyes and seemingly confident gestures. The best part was the drone hovering in front of Greg's spotlight, casting a massive flapping shadow. It created an intricate interplay of light and darkness over his grand display. Onlookers marveled at the eerie transformation unfolding in stark contrast to the choreographed perfection he had fostered. Everything was distorted under this new dynamic, a shadow play that captured everyone's attention, hearkening back to Halloween's true-spirited yet unpredictable nature. It looked like his yard was under attack by a gigantic bat, and the kids went wild with excitement. They clapped and shouted, convinced they'd stumbled into the middle of the best Halloween show. With eyes wide and laughter ready, they egged on the frenzied bat as it pirouetted through the air, unencumbered by wires. Suspended high, it became the unexpected highlight, timed to shift the night's festivities into a whimsical, albeit chaotic, spectacle. Greg was losing his mind, frantically trying to regain control of the situation. He darted between his display and the amused onlookers, efforts in disarray. "Everyone please stay calm, it's part of the show," he lied, his voice betraying the ragged edge of composure ready to snap. However, his feigned confidence only fueled the merriment. Parents chuckled as kids continued to cheer, eyes drawn to the aerial intruder soaring above the typical backyard fare. As the drone buzzed around, I commented, "Looks like your decorations are really stealing the show." The words slipped out lighthearted, deliberately coinciding with a fresh surge of chaos as my bat careened close. Greg's face puffed red with frustration, those earlier smug expressions rearranged into a scowl. He scanned the scene, realization dawning slowly amidst the laughter that his crafty neighbor unwittingly invoked his elaborate distraction with such scathingly gentle nonchalance. Greg glared at me, realizing I was behind the chaos. His eyes narrowed, mouth forming a tight line trying to eke out some semblance of a reply. Yet, it was clear among the flickering lights that his accusation required no words. His suspicions had wings, along with my remote contraption. He began piecing together actions leading up to this crescendo, grappling with the knowledge of involuntary participation wrapped neatly in neighborhood gossip. The crowd's laughter drowned him out, making the revenge even sweeter. Greg opened his mouth, a string of words failing to form coherent protest against the laughter and applause surrounding us. With each attempt, his authority and sense of control dissolved into the growing entertainment of my bat's antics. The disruption became theater, a performance extending beyond his boundaries of scripted design, leaving him isolated amidst what should have been his Halloween triumph. Later that night, Greg confronted me, demanding to know why I did it. He caught me just as I was packing up, the echo of earlier laughter fading into night air. "Really? What was that about?" he pressed, crossing his arms tight against the chill. His expression hung between frustration and reluctant inquiry. I shrugged casually, matching his intensity with tranquility, aware our silent contest had only just begun unpacking its intent. I explained that it was a reminder he was not the king of the street. "You threw eggs on my property over the view, remember?" I pointed out. Each word was calm, leaving Greg to unfurl his antics in his own understanding. "Not everything's yours to rule, and certainly not without repercussions." He huffed loudly, any retort collapsing under the weight of unspoken truths. Lessons set at an intersection of holiday spirit and humility. Greg tried to argue, but he had no real defense. His attempts to justify egging my car fell apart, like the remnants of dried yolk. "It's about respect," he grasped, as if that validated his childish retaliation. The more he spoke, the thinner his excuses grew, words unraveling beneath the weight of neighborhood awareness. With each faltering word, it became clear Greg had no ground to stand on beyond his inflated pride. He was exposed as the petty, entitled neighbor he really was. Beneath the facade of festive hospitality lay a need for attention that couldn't withstand scrutiny. Watching him struggle to regain dignity revealed a truth the rest of the neighborhood began to see. His reputation, built on bluster, was laid bare under the guise of the Halloween chaos. His indignant pretense couldn't shield him from the judgment unfurling around him. I made sure the whole street saw it. As the laughter died down and echoes faded into the night, whispers floated between houses about Greg's overstepping manner. Residents peered from behind curtains, thrilling in the unexpected theater unraveling at the dedicated showman's expense. I stood there, neither gloating nor deflecting, just letting the scene speak for itself. After all, it wasn't solely about my revenge. It became a community-infused revelation. Greg wasn't just embarrassed. Everyone knew he'd overstepped. The usually composed neighbor found himself lacking the words to rectify his tarnished image. Whispers of his misguided actions weaved through the block, leaving a lingering impact. In his attempt to dominate, he'd instead drawn attention to his lesser traits. It became increasingly harder for him to ignore. Every encounter, a reminder of an unforgettable night. Suddenly, his crafted spectacle stood for the wrong reasons. Greg didn't say much to me after that. The usual jabs or comments about parking were replaced with an uneasy quiet. Our once cordial morning nods diminished into hesitant glances. In the days following the eventful Halloween, our street exchanges dulled to silence, with even the kids catching on to the outlined changes. Greg kept his distance, perhaps fearing further humiliation, and giving himself the guise of reconciliation by concealing his presence. Halloween was over, and his decorations slowly disappeared from his yard. Bit by bit, The blow-up pumpkins and eerie ghosts returned to their storage. Greg performed this act methodically, his once prized creations reduced to mundane chores. Each item packed away signified not just the end of the holiday, but also the fading grandeur of his competitive antics. By winter's onset, his lawn was a clean slate, stripped of its gaudy pretenses. He avoided me whenever we crossed paths. Our customary exchanges were now replaced with diverted eyes and shuffled footsteps. Whether in front of the mailbox or on our routine walks, Greg's hurried pace mirrored a subtle retreat. It was as if he hoped time could erase the humiliation he'd suffered. I couldn't deny feeling a slight satisfaction in this newfound relationship. The wordless emphasis of boundaries, firmly, yet silently, redrawn. He was too proud to admit defeat, but he regretted messing with me. Each day, his overconfidence pieced itself back together through restored quiet. Yet even he couldn't mask the underlying regret. Behind his stiffened pride, Greg recognized the fallout of his impulsive actions. Though no apology passed his lips, his demeanor suggested uncharacteristic second thoughts, an acceptance that his reputation was built on shaky ground and had crumbled under its own weight. The neighborhood knew about the egg incident, and Greg's reputation had taken a hit. The once favored yard designer had become the focal point of friendly jests and hushed discussions. In coffee circles and chance street gatherings, his ambitious showmanship turned into an anecdote of what excess could yield. While life continued serenely on the street, memories cemented the incident into neighborhood culture, a shared reminder of Greg's fateful year of competitive zeal. I didn't need to rub it in. He had learned his lesson. The absence of tension told the story better than words ever could, and I saw no point in extending the animosity. Greg's self-inflicted predicament had already served its purpose, silently guiding him towards introspection. With each unwritten rule understood, neighborhood normality gradually resumed. Strangeness faded, leaving only essential lessons in its wake. I was content. The matter had been dealt with amicably. Weeks drifted by, and the charged tension between Greg and me eased into an unspoken understanding. Our once frequent clashes over limitless Halloween grandeur and minor grievances dulled into brief nods or distant glances. We both carried the burden of knowing too well the consequences of thoughtless actions in our minds. The discord had transformed into tacit acceptance of our roles as neighbors, creating a tentative peace. Greg never apologized for the egg incident, but something had changed. The barrage of grievances about my parked car ceased, creating a refreshing calm reminiscent of the pre-Halloween era. While our interactions lost their playful jabs and feigned barbs, they also found a less confrontational rhythm. The neighborhood, too, seemed to breathe easier as the petty disputes evaporated into the past, freeing us all from unnecessary drama. There was a sense of satisfaction that settled within me, knowing I had stood up for myself amidst the chaos Greg had initiated. Reflecting on the entire saga, my elaborate revenge, the spectacles, and the fizzled confrontations offered a newfound confidence. It became a personal victory, standing tall amongst the symbolic shadows of Halloween. The experience underlined the importance of resilience, encouraging the quiet courage needed against unreasonable challenges. The whole ordeal offered a remarkable lesson on asserting boundaries against entitled individuals. Dealing with Greg reinforced the vitality of addressing inconveniences directly, showcasing how doing so could also lead to unanticipated outcomes. Learning to navigate this taught me how our actions can establish personal limits to guide behavior. It was not about exuding aggression, but about understanding the value of standing firm against tested patience. While Greg would likely never become my friend, he had learned an essential lesson. My patience had its limits. These interactions, sporadic in nature yet meaningful, cemented an unspoken respect through acknowledgement of our individual roles. Between the trials and mishaps, a definitive line had been drawn, a boundary marking the tolerable from the intolerable. Greg's awareness of my preparedness to defend those boundaries reframed our neighborly engagements. Halloween had come and gone, yet the memory of my strategic revenge lingered. The streets where children had paraded in costumes now held stories of rivalry and resolution. However short-lived the incident, its echoes clung to the neighborhood chatter in subsequent weeks. What started as a simple dispute over decorations evolved into a narrative unforeseen, weaving together lessons in admiration and acknowledgement across our vibrant, close-knit community. My actions were more than just retaliation. They illuminated the importance of humility in handling disputes. Greg's elaborate Halloween ambitions became a parable for checking pride before it spiraled into chaos. From this confrontation emerged evidence of a necessity to balance creativity with sensitivity in neighborhood dynamics. His elaborate displays, once trophies of egotism, instead fostered contemplation of how lessons in humility can alter public perception. Strikingly, Greg's Halloween obsession laid the path for his public downfall. His fixed pursuit of recognition became his Achilles' heel during our nighttime showdown. Enmeshed in intricate displays, his fixation blinded him to the faults forming beneath the surface. But, as with all obsessions, neglecting reality often yields surprising consequences. One's world crumbles just as quickly as it is constructed, gathering narratives unwelcome and presumed silent bystanders. Unbeknownst to Greg, his vanity had weaponized itself against him during my orchestrated revenge. It was exhilarating to watch his special night unravel, each part of his pretentious exhibit contorted in the spotlight. Observing this spectacle affirmed how unchecked pride can trigger downfalls. The absorbed audience, cheering enthusiasts, and astonished critics witnessed how an assumed strength can transform into an unforeseen weakness when confronted with tactical finesse. In the end, Greg's displays became the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. The entire street acknowledged his entitlement, setting the stage for introspection. His habitual dominance morphed into a call for him to reassess his actions, adjusted through community scrutiny. This meant the narrative had flourished far beyond a simple squabble, prompting a broader reflection on ownership, rights, and the importance of considerate coexistence.